Hello, this is Matthew Jenkins Jaroszewicz, Associate Conductor of the Canton Symphony Orchestra. I am here today with composer Quinn Mason, whose Irish Dance Suite will be performed on our Prelude for Strings concert, coming up on Sunday, November 14th at 7:30 p.m. Hello, Quinn. It's wonderful to talk to you today.
Thank you for having me.
So to start, tell us a bit about your life journey to this point, including how you were first introduced to the world of orchestral music and what inspired you to pursue composition.
Well, so this is a story that takes me all the way back to when I was 10 years old. And even earlier than that, because at that point, I had been listening to classical music radio for about 2 or 3 years. For the most part, classical music is something I found on my own. And I made it a point to kind of discover it further because of all the varieties of music they were playing on the radio. And so when I was 10 years old, I was in elementary school at the time. I started I took a required piano class that really kind of introduced me to instruments and things like that and how music was made from the ground up. So I started playing piano when I was 10, and I still play to a certain extent. A couple of years after that, I started cello lessons. And between those two ages, I had experimented with composition a little bit on and off. Basically, some of my first pieces were solo pieces and things like that. And it was written for my instruments, piano and cello and things like that. And with the cello, actually, I played that for 4 years. I actually no longer play the cello, but I played in the youth orchestra. And that was my very first introduction to ensemble playing. Previously, I had been going to Dallas Symphony Orchestra concerts and things like that. My first concert was Peter and the Wolf at age 10 with Sting narrating. Of course, I didn't know who Sting was, and I still don't, but that was that's everybody's first introduction to classical music nowadays. And that was my very first introduction. So it really turned me on to the sound of the orchestra. And then I had mentors who were in the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. So they took me to a lot of rehearsals and things like that for years. And they kind of taught me how rehearsals were run, how pieces and performances were kind of made, like the process in which they were made. And that got me interested in conducting as well. And so I guess my very first orchestral composition was when I was about 13 or 14. I heard the Symphony No. 2 of Bruckner for the first time and decided I wanted to write something that sounded like that, and attempted to, and failed. Of course, I was like 14 at the time. But I continued to kind of hone my craft in orchestration by lots of intensive score study on my own, lots of rehearsal attending and things like that. And I just wrote these small pieces for orchestra for mostly myself, and then I experimented. It got larger and larger. And, I received my very first orchestral commission in 2017, which came from the Dallas Symphony. And they premiered it in 2019. It was a great success with the audience and surprisingly the critics. And that led to a second commission from them a year later. And then, something weird happened. More and more orchestras started picking up my pieces and playing them. So I ended up working with the San Francisco Symphony, the Utah Symphony. And I know you're based in Ohio. I actually worked with about 2 orchestras around you, Akron and Toledo. So very interesting journey that has led me all across the world, actually. I've worked with an orchestra in Italy, one of Italy's best orchestras, in fact. And so, from that humble beginning of listening to the radio and attending rehearsals to working with some of the best orchestras in the country, in the world, it's been quite a fascinating ride, I would have to say.
Absolutely. And, speaking of actually getting to work with the orchestras, you are, of course, coming to visit us in Canton for the weekend of our concert on November 14th. I looked at your performance calendar on your website, though. Your music is being performed all the time, all over the place. How many performances a year of your music do you usually get to attend, and how do you decide which ones to go to and which ones you simply can't fit in?
It's a really great question. So that performance schedule you see on my website has been pretty much consistent for the past 3 or 4 years. So like, I've been there are at least, even counting the chamber music, there are at least 50 or so performances of my music a year. Of course, I can't attend all that. I can't be everywhere at once, but I do make it a point to attend whoever will have me. And so, of course, thank y'all for having me in Canton in a couple of weeks. But, I also visited the Memphis Symphony a couple of weeks ago. And I guess a great factor in deciding to visit these orchestras, even San Francisco, Utah, and all that, where for me, it's community engagement. And, part of my mission as a composer and a conductor is to kind of demystify the myth that new music is painful to listen to by, in my presence, the composer's living and they're right there. You can ask them any question you want. And so whenever I go to visit any of these orchestras or chamber music societies, I always make it a point to engage with the donors, the audience members, the musicians as well, because, that's how you really make connections and things like that. And so I've had the great fortune to meet some very interesting concertgoers, most of which have never met a living composer before and things like that. And hopefully, as we begin to play more new music, more contemporary music, composers will, realize the importance of engaging with the community to kind of create a sense of welcoming for the audience and things like that.
For sure, for sure. And for those of you listening in the Canton area, you will have several opportunities to engage with Quinn. He will be part of our Spirited Conversations series on Thursday, November 11th at 5:30 in the afternoon at the Zimmerman Symphony Center. So hopefully you can join us for that. Speaking of never having met a living composer before, I'm sure most of our patrons at the Canton Symphony are in that same boat. And as a result, they may not know anything about what it's like to be a composer. For those people, tell them, what does your typical day look like?
Well, it's very unusual. Musicians are very unusual people. They live on their own schedules because they have performances at night, and then they spend most of the day practicing with composition. It's somewhat the opposite because most of my performances are sporadic and things like that. I can spend more time on compositions, and it depends on how long the piece is, how long I'll spend on it. Sometimes I spend a couple of months on it. Sometimes I'll spend years on it. But usually my composition is done late at night when everyone is asleep and I can't be bothered. Most of my day is filled with meetings, working with the next commission or talking to the next organization or the next conductor and things like that, and trying to get everything set for the future. And then most of it is a mix. Most of my day is a mixture of meetings and study. And of course, I go back and I study all sorts of scores from, the Beethoven, the Mozart, the Mahler, and things like that, all the way into, the scores of my colleagues that, they very interesting pieces. And then, I do find time to eat and things like that. And then late at night is when I really go to work. And so, but that could change too, especially when I'm traveling. Sometimes I can't, I have rehearsals during the day and I can't stay up late at night. So I'll find a way to, I'll keep one of these with me. This is where I keep most of my ideas. It's a little black book that has staff paper in it. It's blank over here, but it has staff paper in it. And what I'll usually do is I'll use this for sketches and plans like this. So I'll write over here and then I'll make musical sketches here and things like that. And you can see the date 2019. I've been using this for about 2 years. I'm still not haven't filled it up yet, so it's plenty of stuff. But yeah, so most of my work is done when you're asleep, hopefully.
Well, so it sounds like you mentioned eating, composing, meeting with conductors and commissioners. It sounds like the one thing that was left out was sleep.
Oh yeah, well that's done usually. Well, actually, I just got up a couple of hours ago, so yeah, I usually go to bed at like 5 in the morning. So
Wow, incredible! You and our music director Gerhard Zimmerman both. I used to be a night owl, but the older I get, the harder it is to recover from it. Anyways, tell us a little bit about your approach to composition and your compositional process. You mentioned your sketchbook, but then how about when you go from getting a commission for an orchestral piece, how do you go from that to the finished product?
well, again, that depends on the type of piece I'm writing. Most of my compositional energies, I would have to say, are being spent on orchestral pieces now, even though I'm also fulfilling some chamber music commissions. And usually I find with the chamber music, it's a little bit more personal, especially if I'm writing for a specific performer. I'll have to gauge their personality as a person and then gauge their musical personality to craft a piece that they enjoy writing, or sorry, that I enjoy writing, but they enjoy playing, and things like that. And that does take some time, but it ultimately kind of results in a piece that the performer loves playing again and again. They end up touring it and things like that. And so with an orchestral piece, usually I have to be familiar with the orchestra. So when I received my commission for the Dallas Symphony, I had been watching that orchestra for at least 10 years. So I was very familiar with the sound, the hall in which they played in. So I was able to craft a piece based specifically on that orchestra. If it's an orchestra I haven't worked with before, I do my research and I listen to a bunch of recordings and things like that. I know one of my future commissions will be for San Francisco Symphony and the Esa-Pekka Solomon. And I've actually had the pleasure of getting to know the players of the San Francisco Symphony when I visited them this summer. And in Esa-Pekka, being familiar with him and his conducting style and his recordings and things like that. Hopefully, this piece turns out something they'll enjoy playing. But with that, like I said, all of that can take years, especially when you're doing the business side of things like that. You got to sign contracts and then you have to look at terms and conditions and things like that. But the composition is really fun because then you come up with the ideas. And usually I come up with the ideas. I don't really use a piano. I could, but I've been audiating my ideas ever since I was like small. So I've been just doing that, and then I put them right there in the sketchbook. If I need to work out a chord, then I'll go to a piano. But I'll come up with all the ideas first, and usually I'll come up with several ideas, tens of ideas, and from there I'll look at everything I have, and from there it's just like putting together a puzzle or something like that, and finding how they fit together, and if they don't fit together, finding some way to link them together and things like that, like musical Legos almost. If they don't fit, you don't put them together. And like I said, as you can imagine, taking all of those ideas, putting them together can take some time. And then you factor in the orchestration and then making the full score and things like that. And that can take even more time. So it's all a very slow, meticulous process. It's almost like, painting a picture using the right brushes and choosing the right colors in order to make a canvas that, the bigger picture actually looks beautiful when you listen to it or look at it.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be performing your Irish Dance Suite for string orchestra at our upcoming concert on November 14th. There is a very interesting story in the program notes of the score to this piece, and I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about the inspiration for the piece for our listeners.
Absolutely. That piece is the result of a happy accident. When I was in college, this was like one of my first years in college, I made it a point to go to the library and just check out random CDs. Usually some of them were out of print, but one of them was a Mary O'Hara album. And I did listen to a lot of world music at that point, but I had never listened to, traditional Irish music. And so I checked that CD out and I just kind of listened to it. And some of the themes on there were very, very interesting. I tried looking them up to see if, there were any orchestral arrangements of them, and there weren't. Some of them weren't even transcribed in sheet music. So I had to go through and I had to choose the ones I liked, and I transcribed them in sheet music. And once I had all these things, I looked at them and was like, all of these could work in some sort of suite, like a Holst suite or something like that. And so randomly one night, I just kind of wrote the Irish Dance Suite. Looked at all these themes. I just said, okay, so this is going to go in the third movement. This is going to go in the first movement, and it actually turned out well. The piece was written in 2016. I was 20 years old when I wrote it, but it didn't get premiered until 2019 with the Mission Chamber Orchestra. And then hearing that, I had the chance to kind of revise it and go, some of that didn't work, some of it worked. And now it received a second performance with the Toledo Symphony earlier this year. And listening to that performance, I was like, I got it. So basically, listening to that album, listening to those really, really cool themes, and was like, how would these work on strings? And specifically, I wanted a piece that worked for younger performers that, could be taken to all states and things like that. And I talked to another one of my mentors, Will White, who kind of helped me determine the final form of this composition. So from transcribing a CD to the sheet music is basically how it happened.
Absolutely. That's an amazing story, and amazing that a total happenstance of you coming across the recording resulted in this piece that we are about to play. Now, the piece, as you mentioned, it incorporates the actual Irish folk melodies, some of which you transcribed, as well as original melodies that you created that exist so seamlessly alongside one another. And I'm going to ask a question that maybe only musicians or musically inclined people are going to understand, but I'm curious, and I'm sure musicians are curious. After studying this music in preparation for writing this piece, what would you say are some of the distinct musical features that give Irish folk music its distinct sound?
Well, for the most part, most of it is either in 3 or in 6. With the jig, which is a traditional Irish dance, that's in 6. But with the slip jig, it's in a subdivided 3. And finding a way to kind of, first of all, it was very catchy music. I knew that, regardless of what I did with the themes, it was going to be a hit. Anyways, it was very seamless music that went well with the strings. But looking at how that music was constructed and finding a way to keep it fresh, because, it does repeat a lot. So I found a way to kind of vary the instrumentation, maybe put the theme in the violas here, maybe put it in the basses there, and just kind of find a way to keep it interesting to the listener, at the same time catchy to not only the listener, but the performers as well, and fun for the performers. And then we get to the third movement, which is like a slow 4, and then in the middle section is like a fast 2. So I guess in the third movement is the only hint you get of a 4 and a 2, but the rest of the outer movements are either in 6 or in 3. So it was really, really quite interesting to work with this music and study it and kind of take it apart and see how and why they use those meters. It's very danceable music, basically. I mean, they're all forms of traditional Irish dance.
For sure, for sure. Well, I know that it's a piece our audience is going to absolutely love when they get to hear it here in a couple of weeks. Just a few more questions here before I let you go. You are, I believe, 25 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong. 25.
Yes.
And yet you have already enjoyed an immensely successful career. Tell us just about a few key events or key people who have helped you on your journey to get where you are today.
Absolutely. Earlier, I mentioned my mentors that were in the Dallas Symphony. One of them was the former principal percussionist, Doug Howard, who was instrumental in helping me get into those rehearsals and watch those concerts and things like that. And then his wife, Regine Russell, who's actually the former principal oboist of the Dallas Opera Orchestra. So right there, I had two connections to the Dallas music scene that helped me introduce me to those major organizations. A little bit later, I met Will White, who is a composer and conductor. He is music director of Harmonia Seattle. And I've known Will for about 4 or 5 years now. Will has been absolutely great in helping me with my conducting. He commissioned several of my pieces that are now very popular. He commissioned In Memory, my viola solo, which has now had over 100 performances since its premiere last year. He also commissioned A Joyous Trilogy, which is my most popular orchestral piece so far. And we still keep in touch to this day. And I'm actually writing my symphony number 5 for him for a future concert. And then I've also had some great help in professionally in classical music as well, like the conductor Edwin Outwater, who is music director of the San Francisco Conservatory. I actually met him when I took a course with him last summer, and then we kind of hit it off, and he has been a great mentor ever since. He was the one that introduced my work to the San Francisco Symphony when he conducted it there. And he is absolutely fantastic too. I also had the great chance of working with Marin Alsop this past summer at the National Orchestral Institute. I studied conducting with her, and her advice and teaching was absolutely fantastic as well. And so this is too many to name, but those are some of the ones that have had an amazing impact on my musical career and path, I would have to say.
For sure, for sure. Lastly, you've had your music performed by so many major performing ensembles around the country and the world. What, in your memory, is the most magical night of you witnessing one of your pieces being performed? What sticks out in your mind as just being the most incredible experience of seeing your composition come to life?
Well, it would have to be the very first performance of my reflection on the memorial with the San Francisco Symphony. This would have been July 2nd of this year. And it was in Davies Hall. And it's a very personal piece to me. It was commissioned by the Dallas Symphony for a concert that was remembering victims of racial violence. But with that piece, I kind of opened up the meaning of it and kind of invited the audience to kind of imagine something that they lost, and just kind of imagine that as they were listening to the piece. And so when Edwin Outwater took the stage, he introduced that piece, and he did exactly what I did in the program. He invited the audience to kind of reflect on something they lost during the pandemic in the past year and things like that. As we begin to rebuild, listen to this piece and reflect on it and things like that. And it was a moving performance. The orchestra did absolutely fantastic. And then, at the end, one dude to my left said bravo. And then I went up to take my bow. I shook Edwin Outwater's hand. I took up, I looked, I turned around, right? And the whole entire hall was on their feet.
Amazing.
It was a standing ovation. I'd never gotten one of those before. So I was like moved that people were actually moved by my piece. And then it got a great review in the paper too. That's a bonus. But the fact that the audience connected with the piece so deeply was, I had done my job, I would have to say.
For sure. And it's what all of us in the music world always hope to do, is to touch some deep part of every member of the audience that connects them and connects with them and moves them. Well, that is absolutely fantastic. Quinn, it's been a pleasure talking with you today, and we cannot wait to have you join us in Canton in a couple weeks.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Quinn Mason, his Irish Dance Suite will be performed on our Prelude for Strings concert on November 14th at 7:30 p.m. You can also come and meet him and hear him speak at his Spirited Conversation, November 11th. Doors open at 5:30 with the conversation beginning at 6 p.m.